Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you just found this place, then welcome, and if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we are doing one of our quick builds, where we'll be exploring a briefly summarized character build for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. As always with quick builds, if there's ever a build you'd like to see me explore in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below. The concept for today's quick build comes from David C. 9005, who asked for a Halfling Slinger build, perhaps with magic stone, or maybe a glass stone that gets slung that has acid or smoke inside of it. Now this is a pretty interesting concept for a build, and building around a sling or magic stone using a sling is all pretty neat in itself. Making it specifically halfling oriented is kind of difficult though. There's nothing about the halfling lineage that really meshes or synergizes with a slinger in particular. Of course, thematically, it just kind of makes sense. There is the archetypal Halfling Slinger, Tasslehoff Burrfoot from the Dragonlance book series. In terms of a 5e build though, there isn't a whole lot that we really get from being a halfling that mixes well with being a slinger. But we can try to make a specifically halfling slinger by adding a couple restrictions. We're definitely going to want to build a slinger character. There's a couple different ways to do this, and I'll go through and mention each one of them. But beyond just picking up things that make us a good slinger, we also want to show off that we are a halfling. And I think the best way to do that would probably be to pick up some halfling specific feats. There's quite a few different ones like Bountiful Luck, Second Chance, and technically Squat Nimbleness could count because that's a feat specific to small characters. But as long as we can pick up at least one of those throughout our build, then I would count that as a good enough prerequisite for our halfling slinger. Time to jump into the build. We've got a lot of different options to cover today, so let's get right into it. Starting in character creation with our lineage, we are of course a halfling. I'm not going to specify what type of subrace of halfling that we would be, because it feels like as a halfling slinger, we should be able to be any subrace of halfling, and the build should work just as effectively. Beyond that, at character creation, our stats I'm not going to go into because they will vary quite a bit, but generally we want to have our primary ability score be either dexterity, to use the sling, or one of intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, depending on how we pick up magic stone if we're building for magic stone. And then we also want our constitution to be a secondary, just because it's nice to have health. Finally, for our background, anything can work because anything should be able to work for our halfling slinger. So for option 1, because like I said, we do have lots of options, we're going to look purely at damage. If you wanted to build a halfling slinger that focuses mainly on just dealing damage, then this is probably the route we would want to go. We'd want to put a majority of our levels into fighter. Doesn't have to be all of them, but definitely enough to pick up at least 3 attacks with fighter 11. Going this way gives us a little bit of versatility because we could still build around magic stone if you really wanted to, or you could just pick up a sling and either get a magical sling itself or magical ammunition for the sling in order to overcome the resistance to non-magical bludgeoning damage that a regular sling would deal. Magic stone also gets around that because it makes regular ammunition magical that we use in our sling, but it's a bonus action every now and then to actually continuously create that magical ammunition. So what are the benefits for going fighter as a pure damage build? Well, if you're not looking to build around magic stone, it's pretty easy to have our build online right away. The main feat we want to add some extra damage onto our attacks is Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter gives us a -5 penalty for extra 10 damage on each of our attacks. With 3 attacks in a single round, up to 6 with Action Surge, that could be quite a bit. We can get more out of hand if we were to pick a subclass like Samurai, which allows us to use a bonus action to gain advantage on all of our attacks for a specific turn. Plus, Samurai eventually get Rapid Strike, which allows us to trade advantage on one of our attacks for an extra attack as part of that attack action. The other bonus is because we would get so many feats as a straight fighter, we could also pick up things like Crusher for some extra on-demand control. Being able to move one enemy 5 feet once per turn isn't too bad. And we can also get our halfling feats. We'd be spoiled for choice in terms of what feats we're picking up. So we could really get at least 1, if not all 3 of the feats that we want. That is Bountiful Luck, Second Chance, and Squat Nimbleness. Now, if you did want to build around Magic Stone, then you could multi-class into any class that does get the Magic Stone cantrip. but ideally, Ranger or Warlock would be the two best to synergize for damage. The reason I say that is because Ranger gives us access to an extra fighting style, as well as the Hunter's Mark spell and Favored Foe ability. And you could pick a subclass like Gloomstalker, which just gives us an extra attack on our first turn. That's a big extra output of damage for us. Warlock, on the other hand, gets the Hex spell, which is basically Hunter's Mark, and you can also go Hexblade to get something like Hexblade's Curse, which gets a little bit of extra damage whenever we deal damage to an enemy, and it allows us to crit on 19 or 20 instead of just 20. The one thing that we can't do rules as written, but would be really nice to if your DM is willing, is if you were to go Warlock and pick the Pact of the Blade feature. Rules as written, it doesn't work because the Pact of the Blade specifies that our pact weapon has to be a melee weapon, and the improved pact weapon specifies different ranged weapons that we can turn our pact weapon into, like a short bow, long bow, light crossbow, or heavy crossbow. Looking now at option 2 is built around the idea of wanting to be more of an expert character rather than just all about building for pure damage. We're building around Rogue, which Rogue of course gains sneak attack, which works with a sling, and of course with Magic Stone as well, because all sneak attack cares about is whether we're using a ranged weapon. And you can put the ammunition from Magic Stone into a sling to get that check. Now with this option, we are actually going to want to build around Magic Stone more than just picking up a regular sling. And the reason for that is because we can use Rogue as the basis for our sort of out of combat utility skills, and then based on what class we pick to get Magic Stone, we can specialize into that type of skill set. For example, if you wanted to be a rogue that was really good at investigation and other intelligence-based skills, you could multiclass Artificer, who gets Magic Stone. Then go up high enough into Artificer and you get things like Flash of Genius. You could pick up subclasses like Artillerist for extra damage, or Battlesmith for some extra tanking if you wanted to. Both of those subclasses offer features that don't necessarily synergize with being a slinger, but that complement it pretty well. If you wanted to be more of a survivalist and good at perception and survival checks, you could instead focus on wisdom and multiclass into either druid or ranger. Either one of these paired with the scout rogue would be a very good option for just a scout type character in general. Ranger, I suppose I should mention, can get Magic Stone as long as they take the Druidic Warrior fighting style, but here we could definitely use either one of these two subclasses to pick it up, and we could reasonably go with any circle or conclave that either class gets that just feels either thematic for our character or that would provide us the best bonus to whatever we want to do. Finally, there's Charisma. Charisma, of course, pairs with Warlock, since Warlock gets Magic Stone. And we could also get the Invocation Beguiling Influence, which gives us flat proficiency in both Persuasion and Deception, meaning we don't have to pick those as skills for our rogue class. We just get them from the Invocation. We'd have lots of skills available to us, and we could use our expertise to get placed into those Charisma skills in order to become a really good face of the party. Our final option for our Halfling Slinger is to build a support-based Halfling Slinger. And this is one that's not only going to want to maybe build around Magic Stone, but also have the possibility of slinging glass, stones, or vials filled with acid, smoke, or anything else that you may want. And to do this, we're going to go straight up Artificer. Not only are we going to be an Artificer to pick up Magic Stone, like I mentioned in our Expert option, but we're also going to pick Alchemist, probably the least popular Artificer subclass. I don't think I'm stretching too much of the truth by saying that. So the thing about this build is that it's maybe not completely possible rules as written. The idea of what we would want to do here is take a little bit of Baldur's Gate ingenuity and allow us to sling our potions or experimental elixirs that we make from being an alchemist and sling them at our allies. Hopefully, if they break on impact, that will allow them to take effect on our ally and give that ally a buff or healing. Obviously, this does not work rules as written. You do have to work with your DM, and I think it's fair to say that they would consider this to be an improvised weapon attack that we would make in order to try and hit our allies with our various potions or things that we would be using, and that's perfectly fair. It would mean that we would have to take the Tavern Brawler feat to gain proficiency with improvised weapons, but I think that if your DM was allowing you to do this at that cost, it's fairly reasonable. The other potential is to use our downtime out of combat in order to create various elixirs or vials that aren't support oriented, but are damage or condition oriented. Maybe you do make a smoke bomb, or perhaps grab some alchemist fire or a flask of acid, and then you sling those as improvised weapons against enemies. Again, there's nothing rules as written for that because, real honestly, I don't think the designers really expected anyone to go around slinging various things at their opponents. And if anything, like Alchemist Fire, rules as written, you kind of can't do it because they will specifically say, as an action, you toss the vial. For the sake of having a fun character, I would hope your DM would allow you to bypass that by just making an improvised weapon attack with your sling. So now it's time to summarize our build, or builds in this case. We are certainly a Halfling Slinger, and there's a lot of different ways we can build our Halfling Slinger. We don't have to just focus on damage and in-combat shenanigans. We can focus on being an expert and being skilled outside of combat with specific skill sets that complement the Magic Stone cantrip. The main drawback of Magic Stone specifically is the fact that it requires a bonus action investment every now and then in order to create more magical ammunition for our sling, but beyond that, it's not the end of the world. The last thing to mention is that it goes without saying, we definitely want to make sure on each of these options that we set aside one ability score improvement or feat to pick up a Halfling specific feat. Bountiful Luck or Second Chance would be my first two go-to picks for our Halfling Slinger. Second Chance doesn't really interact with our Lucky feature, but it is a half feat, so that can be really nice. It's also a reroll for when an enemy attacks us. Bountiful Luck is a really good support feat because it lets us share our Halfling Lucky lineage ability with our allies within 30 feet of us. Again, it's a reaction that we have to use, but it still allows us to share that bonus a little bit, which can be pretty nice when our ally of ours does roll a natural 1. Meanwhile, Squat Nimbleness is of course the most mechanically beneficial for us because it gives us a speed increase, it's a half feat, and it gives us a bonus to acrobatics or athletics. Overall, no matter what option you pick, I hope one of the options is inspirational enough as a Halfling Slinger that you'd potentially want to use that at some point in game, or just like the novelty of the idea. Maybe what you would do to get closer to being a full Slinger built character, or maybe how you would bring out the Halfling theme a bit more. And thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.